Sarah Bennett drew in a deep breath as she walked up the concrete steps of the downtown courthouse. The morning sun cast long shadows behind her, and the crisp autumn air made her pull her simple navy blazer a bit tighter. She just left a coding workshop where she'd been teaching underprivileged teens, which explained her casual outfit: dark jeans, white sneakers, and a plain black t-shirt under the blazer. The security guard at the entrance barely looked up as he waved her through the metal detector. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly in her bag, but she'd silenced it. Being CEO of Secure Flow Technologies meant there was always some crisis or decision waiting, but right now, she had to deal with this traffic ticket situation. The hallways echoed with footsteps as Sarah followed the signs to courtroom 304. She wanted to handle this herself, even though her company's lawyers had offered to send someone in her place. "It's just a traffic ticket," she had told them with a smile. "I can spare a morning to sort this out." Inside the courtroom, Sarah found herself among about 30 other people, all waiting their turn before Judge Richard Harrison. The wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable, and the air conditioning hummed too loudly overhead. She pulled out her tablet, which contained clear evidence that the traffic camera had malfunctioned. The timestamp on the footage didn't match the citation, and she had data from her car's computer system to prove it. As she waited, Sarah quietly answered a few urgent emails. Her company was in the final stages of closing a major government contract, but that would have to wait. Around her, people shuffled in and out as their cases were called. Some left looking relieved, others frustrated. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, efficiently moved through the docket. "I've worked too hard to let a false citation stay on my record," Sarah thought to herself as she reviewed her evidence one last time. She built her company from scratch over the past 8 years, turning it from a small startup into a leading provider of AI-powered security systems. This ticket wasn't just about money, it was about principle. Judge Harrison sat high on his bench, his gray hair and black robe giving him an imposing presence. Sarah noticed how he handled each case. Quick, stern, and with very little patience for explanations. He seemed particularly harsh with younger defendants, often cutting them off mid-sentence. The morning dragged on. Sarah watched as a young man in a suit and tie received a reduced fine for going 30 miles over the speed limit. The judge had listened patiently to his explanation about a work emergency. Just before her case, an elderly white woman had her ticket dismissed entirely after a lengthy story about her grandchildren distracting her. "Sarah Bennett," the clerk finally called out. Sarah stood up, smoothing her jeans and gathering her tablet. As she walked to the podium, she noticed Judge Harrison didn't look up from his papers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and someone's phone chimed softly in the background. "Miss Bennett, you're here for running a red light on Oak Street on September 15th, Judge Harrison stated flatly, still not making eye contact. His voice carried the weariness of someone who'd heard every excuse possible. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied clearly. "I have evidence that the traffic camera—" "Miss Bennett," Judge Harrison interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes swept over her casual outfit, and something in his expression shifted. "The citation clearly states you ran the light at 9:43 a.m. Do you deny being at that intersection?" "Your Honor, if I could just show you the timestamp discrepancy," Sarah began again, trying to open her tablet. "Young lady," Judge Harrison's tone grew sharper, making several heads turn in the courtroom. "This court's time is valuable. The evidence from the traffic camera is clear. If you addressed more appropriately for court today, perhaps that would show you take these proceedings seriously." The clerk glanced up from her computer, her expression showing subtle disapproval at the judge's comment. Sarah stood straight, maintaining her composure despite the dismissive treatment. Years of being the only black woman in corporate boardrooms had taught her plenty about keeping cool under prejudice. "The fine is $400, Judge Harrison declared, already looking at the next case file. "See the clerk for payment arrangements if needed." Sarah felt her phone buzz again in her pocket. Probably another message about the pending government contract, worth millions to her company. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on her. But as she turned to walk away, she didn't say a word. Some battles weren't worth fighting, but some moments deserved to be remembered and shared. This, she decided, would be one of them. The tension in courtroom 304 grew thicker as Judge Harrison leaned forward on his bench, peering down at Sarah through his wire-rimmed glasses. His next words carried the weight of years of unchecked assumptions. "Miss Bennet," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for those he believed needed a lesson in responsibility. "Since you seem to have difficulty understanding the seriousness of your violation, let me explain it in terms you might grasp." Sarah stood perfectly still at the podium, her tablet still clutched in her hands. Around her, the usual shuffling and whispers of the courtroom had gone quiet. The court clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as she watched the scene unfold. "When people like you disregard traffic signals," Judge Harrison continued, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child, "you put everyone's lives at risk. I see it every day, young people who think rules don't apply to them. Perhaps if you spend more time focusing on building a proper career instead of making excuses, you wouldn't find yourself in this situation." A few gasps echoed through the courtroom. Mrs. Rodriguez's face tightened with disapproval, but protocol kept her silent. Sarah's phone buzzed again in her pocket, likely her CFO trying to reach her about the morning's stock fluctuations after their latest product announcement. "Your Honor." Sarah tried once more, her voice steady despite the growing frustration. "I have evidence that the traffic camera." "Ms. Bennet." Judge Harrison's voice boomed through the courtroom. "Your casual attitude, from your inappropriate attire to your constant interruptions, shows a distinct lack of respect for this court. The fine will be $500, and I'm adding court costs." Sarah's grip tightened on her tablet. Inside it was not only proof of the camera malfunction, but also the morning's presentation slides from her coding workshop and several urgent emails about SecureFlow's upcoming merger negotiations. The same SecureFlow that provided security systems to this very courthouse. The judge continued his lecture, seemingly encouraged by Sarah's silence. "Perhaps this higher fine will help you understand the importance of following rules. I suggest you use this as a learning experience. Not everyone gets second chances in life." Mrs. Rodriguez had begun writing something on a sticky note, her movements sharp with barely contained anger. Other defendants in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others watching with obvious concern. However, Judge Harrison added, his voice dripping with condescension, "Given your apparent financial situation, I'll allow you to set up a payment plan with the clerk. We don't want this to be too much of a burden." Sarah almost laughed at the irony. The burden he was so concerned about amounted to less than what she spent on coffee for her office each week. Instead, she maintained her composure, years of boardroom negotiations serving her well. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied quietly, her dignity intact. "Will that be all?" Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively, already reaching for the next case file. Yes, see the clerk. And Miss Bennet." He looked up one last time, his expression stern. "Do try to dress appropriately if you find yourself in my courtroom again." As Sarah turned to leave, Mrs. Rodriguez caught her eye and gave her a subtle, apologetic shake of her head. The court officer by the door stood straighter as Sarah passed, perhaps noticing the quiet confidence in her stride that no amount of unfair treatment could diminish. In the hallway, Sarah finally pulled out her phone. 27 missed messages, including one about the successful completion of their latest government contract, a $50 million deal for advanced security systems. Her assistant had also sent over the final draft of her upcoming keynote speech for the National Technology Leadership Conference. She paused by a window, watching as traffic moved below on the street, the same street where the faulty camera had triggered this whole situation. Taking a deep breath, she opened her laptop bag and pulled out her checkbook, the one with the SecureFlow Technologies logo prominently displayed in the corner. As she walked back toward the clerk's office, Sarah began composing a mental outline of a LinkedIn post. Not an angry rant or a call for public shaming, but a thoughtful examination of bias in the justice system. After all, she hadn't built a successful tech company by burning bridges. She'd done it by turning obstacles into opportunities for change. The clerk's office was just ahead, and Sarah smiled slightly. Sometimes the best response to prejudice wasn't outrage, but excellence. And she had excellence in abundance. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Sarah's corner office at SecureFlow Technologies headquarters. She sat at her desk, fingers hovering over her keyboard as she carefully composed her LinkedIn post. The past 2 hours since leaving the courthouse had given her time to process the morning's events and channel her feelings into something constructive. Today, I experienced something that many face daily, she typed, then paused to consider her next words. Sarah wasn't interested in creating drama or seeking revenge. Instead, she wanted to spark a meaningful conversation about unconscious bias. Her executive assistant, Michael, knocked softly before entering with her afternoon coffee. The development team is ready for the 3 p.m. meeting, he reminded her. And CNBC called again about featuring secure flow in their Future of Tech segment. Sarah nodded, still focused on her screen as she continued writing. As CEO of a technology company valued at $200 million, I'm often reminded that appearances can be deceiving. This morning, in a routine traffic court appearance, I witnessed firsthand how quick judgments and assumptions can shape our justice system. Her phone lit up with messages from her leadership team about their latest product launch, but Sarah remained focused on crafting her message. The post wasn't just about her experience. It was about countless others who faced similar treatment without the platform to speak up. The judge saw what he expected to see, a young black woman in casual clothes who, in his words, needed to learn about responsibility. What he didn't see was the CEO who had just come from teaching coding to underprivileged youth, the woman whose company provides security systems to federal agencies, or the evidence of a malfunctioning traffic camera on my tablet. As she wrote, Sarah remembered the court clerk's disapproving looks at the judge's behavior. She included no names, no specific court details, just the experience and its broader implications for society. By late afternoon, her post had already gathered thousands of likes and shares. Tech leaders from Silicon Valley to Singapore were commenting, sharing similar experiences, and calling for change. Several major news outlets had picked up the story, focusing on the irony of a judge dismissing someone whose company protected his very courthouse. Sarah, Michael appeared again, CNN is on line 1, and the mayor's office on line 2. They're both asking for comments about your post. She glanced at her phone, over 100 missed calls and messages. The post had clearly struck a nerve, especially within the tech community, where diversity remained a constant challenge. Even her competitors were sharing the post, adding their own stories of being underestimated. The responses that touched her most came from young professionals and students. Your story gives me hope. Thank you for speaking up. This happens to me all the time, but I never had the courage to talk about it. By early evening, #TechCEO in Traffic Court was trending on Twitter. Business magazines were rushing to update their profiles on Sarah and SecureFlow. The story had evolved beyond a simple courthouse incident into a larger conversation about prejudice and presumptions in professional settings. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Proud of you, baby. You handled it with grace, just like always." She smiled, remembering her mother's constant advice about turning negative experiences into positive change. As the sun set over the city skyline, Sarah reviewed the final analytics of her post: over 50,000 shares, 200,000 likes, and thousands of comments. More importantly, it had sparked discussions in law firms, tech companies, and courthouses across the country about conscious and unconscious bias. Her PR team had prepared a suggested response to the media frenzy, but Sarah declined. "Let the post speak for itself," she told them. "This isn't about one judge or one court experience. It's about starting a conversation about change." Just before leaving the office, Sarah received an unexpected email from Mrs. Rodriguez, the court clerk. "Your dignity in that courtroom spoke volumes. Thank you for sharing your story. Things need to change, and voices like yours help make that happen." As she gathered her things to head home, Sarah noticed a notification about SecureFlow's stock price. It had jumped 3% since her post went viral. Investors were impressed, not just by her handling of the situation, but by the revelation of how deeply her company's security systems had penetrated government infrastructure. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more discussions, and more opportunities to shape the narrative. But for now, Sarah was content knowing that her experience might help others facing similar situations. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful response to prejudice wasn't anger or revenge, but simply shining a light on the truth and letting people draw their own conclusions. The media storm hit full force the next morning. Local news vans lined up outside the courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching into the gray morning sky. Inside, reporters cluttered the hallways, hoping to catch a glimpse of either Judge Harrison or any court official willing to comment on yesterday's viral story. Channel 5's morning news anchor, Jessica Chen, stood before the courthouse steps, speaking into her microphone. The story has captured national attention. A local judge's treatment of what he assumed was just another defendant, only to learn she was Sarah Bennett, CEO of Secure Flow Technologies, the very company that designed and maintains this courthouse's security systems. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Security guards who used Secure Flow's systems daily now whispered among themselves, sharing links to articles about their company's CEO. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same security cameras monitoring the building's entrance had been installed under Sarah's leadership. Mrs. Rodriguez, the court clerk, found herself surrounded by curious reporters during her lunch break. No comment, she repeated firmly, though her expression spoke volumes. She witnessed countless similar scenarios in that courtroom, but this one had finally brought the issue into the spotlight. By midday, major networks had picked up the story. CNBC ran a special segment titled Hidden Figures in Tech, the Sarah Bennett story, highlighting her journey from a small coding bootcamp to leading a major security firm. The piece featured clips of Sarah speaking at tech conferences, meeting with government officials, and most impressively, footage of her company's advanced security systems being installed in various federal buildings. What makes this story particularly interesting, said tech analyst Mark Thompson on Bloomberg TV, is that Secure Flow Technologies isn't just any company. They're the leading provider of AI-enhanced security systems to government facilities. Their technology protects everything from courthouses to federal agencies. The judge effectively dressed down the person responsible for keeping his own courthouse secure. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning. Her PR team had set up camp in one of Secure Flow's conference rooms, fielding calls from journalists, industry leaders, and even politicians wanting to discuss judicial reform. However, Sarah stayed focused on her regular schedule. She had a morning meeting with her development team and an afternoon session teaching at the coding boot camp. At the courthouse, Judge Harrison's colleague, Judge Maria Ramirez, watched the coverage from her chambers with growing concern. "Richard," she muttered to herself, shaking her head as she recognized the Secure Flow logo on her computer's security interface. The same system Sarah's company had installed last year. The courthouse's chief judge called an emergency meeting with all judges to discuss implicit bias and public perception. The irony thickened when they had to use Secure Flow's secure conference system to include judges attending remotely. By afternoon, social media had exploded with similar stories. #SeeHoIam started trending, with professionals sharing experiences of being underestimated or dismissed based on appearances. Several other tech CEOs, especially women and minorities, began sharing their own courthouse experiences. Local news teams discovered that Secure Flow's technology wasn't just in the courthouse. It protected the city's major infrastructure, from traffic systems to emergency services. Sarah's company had quietly become integral to the city's security while remaining largely unknown to the public. The real story here, commented civil rights attorney James Wilson on a popular evening news show, isn't just about one judge's behavior. It's about the systems and assumptions that allow such incidents to happen daily. Ms. Bennett's experience just happened to have an ironic twist that caught public attention. At Secure Flow's headquarters, Sarah's team noticed a surge in job applications. Young professionals, especially women and minorities in tech, were inspired by her story. The company's social media manager reported that their LinkedIn follower count had doubled in just 24 hours. As evening approached, a junior clerk from the courthouse leaked an interesting detail. The security camera footage from Sarah's court session had been automatically archived by none other than Secure Flow's own system. The footage existed on secure servers, protected by the very technology Sarah had helped develop. The day ended with a powerful opinion piece in the city's major newspaper, featuring side-by-side photos, one of Sarah in the casual clothes she'd worn to court, teaching coding to underprivileged youth, and another of her in business attire, speaking at a national security conference. The headline read, "Beyond Appearances, the judge who didn't see what he was looking at." Sarah's last meeting of the day was with her board of directors, who reported that the company's profile had never been higher. As she left the office that evening, she couldn't help but smile at the news van still parked outside the courthouse. Sometimes, she thought, the best lessons come from unexpected places. Judge Harrison sat in his home office early Monday morning, coffee growing cold beside him as he stared at the latest issue of Tech Innovators magazine. There on the glossy cover was Sarah Bennett, looking polished and powerful in a tailored suit, under the headline, 40 Under 40, The Brilliant Minds Shaping Our Future. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the feature article. The magazine had been delivered to every judge's chamber, a courtesy subscription the courthouse maintained. But this morning, reading it in the privacy of his home, the judge felt the full weight of his recent actions. Sarah Bennett, the article began, started coding at age 12 on a borrowed laptop. Today, at 34, she leads Secure Flow Technologies, a $200 million company providing cutting-edge security systems to government facilities nationwide. Most notably, her AI-driven security platforms protect over 200 courthouses across the country. The judge pushed back from his desk, memories of last week's courtroom incident playing in his mind. The young woman in casual clothes, the dismissive tone he'd used, the assumptions he'd made. All of it came rushing back with uncomfortable clarity. His daughter Rachel, a law student visiting for the weekend, appeared in the doorway. "Dad, have you seen this?" She held up her phone, showing a viral video compilation of successful CEOs sharing stories of being misjudged. Sarah's story led the segment. "I know, Rachel," he said quietly, gesturing to the magazine. "I know." "Did you really not recognize her?" Rachel asked, entering the room. SecureFlow's logo is literally on every security camera in your courthouse. The judge stood up, walking to his window. Outside, morning traffic moved steadily, each car passing under traffic cameras that, he now realized, were probably maintained by Sarah's company. The irony wasn't lost on him. The article continued to detail Sarah's journey, her full scholarship to MIT, her early career at major tech companies, and her bold decision to start Secure Flow after identifying critical vulnerabilities in existing security systems. But what caught the judge's attention most was the section about her community work. Despite her packed schedule, he read, Bennett dedicates every Wednesday morning to teaching coding to underprivileged youth. "I show up in my casual clothes," she explains in the interview, "because I want these kids to see that success isn't about what you wear. It's about what you build." Wednesday morning, the same morning she'd appeared in his courtroom. His phone buzzed, a message from the chief judge calling an emergency meeting about bias training. Attached was a spreadsheet showing Secure Flow's extensive contracts with their courthouse system, including the recent $1.2 million upgrade Sarah's company had completed just months ago. Rachel sat in his leather chair, still scrolling through her phone. "Dad, there's more. She's speaking at the National Judicial Conference next month about technology in the justice system. You're registered to attend, aren't you?" Judge Harrison nodded slowly. He'd been selected to moderate a panel about modernizing court systems, a panel that, he now realized with growing discomfort, would likely feature Secure Flow's technology. The magazine article ended with a quote from Sarah about breaking stereotypes in tech. "Every time someone underestimates me, they're not just misjudging one person, they're maintaining a system that holds back countless others. My success isn't just about proving them wrong, it's about opening doors for those who come after me." As the morning wore on, Judge Harrison received more reminders of his mistake. The courthouse security upgrade meeting had been rescheduled. Apparently, Sarah herself would be presenting Secure Flow's new features via video conference. His court clerk had submitted a formal request for bias training for all courthouse staff, with his recent interaction cited as a relevant example. Rachel watched her father absorb it all, then spoke softly, "You know, Dad, my constitutional law professor always says that justice is supposed to be blind to everything except the facts." Judge Harrison looked again at Sarah's photo in the magazine, her confident smile, her accomplished eyes. He thought about the casual clothes she'd worn to court, coming straight from teaching kids who might never have seen a successful tech CEO up close if not for her. "Your professor is right," he finally said, reaching for his phone. He had a lot of work to do, starting with an honest look at his own biases. The next time someone stood in his courtroom, you'd remember this lesson. Justice might be blind, but those who serve it must learn to truly see. Judge Harrison sat alone in his chambers late into the evening, reviewing court recordings from the past month. The familiar faces and voices flickered across his computer screen, but tonight he was watching with new eyes. His coffee had gone cold, and the setting sun cast long shadows through his office window. Case number 2347, his own voice echoed from the speakers. He watched himself interact with a young Hispanic man in a suit, showing patience and understanding when the defendant explained his traffic violation. Just 20 minutes later in the same session, he sought his harsh treatment of a black woman in similar circumstances. The judge paused the playback and removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. The patterns were impossible to ignore now. His daughter Rachel's words from their weekend conversation still rang in his ears. "Dad, sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we have to face about ourselves." Mrs. Rodriguez, his court clerk of 15 years, had left a stack of statistics on his desk earlier that day. The numbers told a story he'd never noticed before. Disparities in fine amounts, differences in how he handled explanations from various defendants, patterns in who received payment plans versus immediate penalties. His phone buzzed, another message from Rachel. She'd sent him an article about a judicial bias training program in Seattle that had shown promising results. "Think about it, Dad," her message read. "Real change starts with acknowledgement." The security camera in the corner of his chamber caught his eye. The small SecureFlow logo now seemed to watch him with silent judgment. He thought about Sarah Bennett again, wondering how many other successful professionals he dismissed without a second thought. Opening his court calendar for the next day, Judge Harrison began making notes. For each case, he wrote a simple reminder: listen first. Question assumptions. It felt like a small step, but he knew small steps were how real change began. A knock on his chamber door interrupted his thoughts. It was Judge Martinez, his colleague of 20 years. "Richard," she said, entering with a concerned look. "It's past 8. You've been watching these recordings for hours." "Elena," he replied, gesturing to his screen. "How long have you known about this?" He waved at the statistical reports on his desk. Judge Martinez sat down heavily in the chair across from him. "We'd all have our blind spots, Richard. The question is what we do once we see them." He played her a clip from last week, his voice harsh with a young black lawyer, interrupting her arguments repeatedly. Then another clip from the same day, showing his patient interaction with an older white attorney who had been far less prepared. "I never saw it," he said quietly, "or maybe I didn't want to see it." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "You know, when I first started, a wise judge told me something I never forgot. He said, 'The law might be black and white, but the people before us lie in color. Our job is to see them clearly.'" Harrison nodded slowly, thinking of Sarah Bennett standing at his bench, evidence in hand, while he saw only what he expected to see. His computer pinged with an email. The courthouse had just approved mandatory bias training for all judicial staff, starting next month. "I've been on the bench for 25 years, Elena," he said, his voice heavy with realization. "How many careers did I affect? How many lives?" "The past we can't change," she replied, standing to leave. "But tomorrow is another story." After she left, Judge Harrison stayed late into the night, creating a personal action plan. He listed concrete steps: attending additional training beyond the mandatory sessions, establishing a mentorship program for young lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds, creating a feedback system for court proceedings. His last task of the night was drafting an email to the chief judge, volunteering to share his recent experiences as part of the upcoming bias training. It wasn't enough to recognize his mistakes privately. Real change required public accountability. As he finally prepared to leave, Harrison noticed a young law clerk working late in the courthouse library. Through the window, he saw her practicing arguments, her determination evident even at this late hour. Tomorrow, he thought, she might appear in his courtroom. Tomorrow, he would do better. Turning off his chamber lights, Judge Harrison made a final note in his calendar for the next day. "Remember Sarah Bennett. Look deeper. Justice sees all." The SecureFlow security camera blinked silently as he left, recording one judge's first steps toward change. Steps that would ripple through his courtroom and beyond, one case at a time. 2 weeks after his deep self-reflection, Judge Harrison stood nervously outside SecureFlow Technologies' headquarters. The modern glass building reached toward the sky, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight. In his hand, he held a letter, not an apology, but an invitation to create real change. Security personnel at the front desk scanned his ID, and Harrison noticed the familiar Secure Flow interface on their screens. A young receptionist led him to a waiting area, where awards and recognitions lined the walls. Among them was the fresh copy of Tech Innovators magazine, with Sarah Bennett's cover story. "Judge Harrison," a voice called. He turned to see Michael, Sarah's executive assistant. "Miss Bennett will see you now." The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Harrison had rehearsed this conversation countless times, but standing here now, everything felt different. The doors opened to reveal an open-concept office space where diverse teams of engineers and developers worked collaboratively. Sarah's office was surprisingly modest, glass-walled with a clear view of her working alongside her team. When Harrison entered, she was reviewing code with a young intern. She looked up, her expression professional but reserved. "Judge Harrison," she said, rising from her desk. "This is unexpected." "Miss Bennett," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm not here to merely apologize. I'm here because I want to transform our judicial system's approach to bias, and I believe you can help." Sarah gestured for him to sit, her expression curious. Harrison pulled out his proposal, a detailed plan for a comprehensive program combining technology and training to identify and address bias in the courts. "We've installed monitoring systems in every courtroom," he explained, "but we're not using them to their full potential. What if we could use Secure Flow's AI to analyze patterns in judicial behavior? Not to punish, but to educate and improve." Sarah leaned forward, her initial reserve softening as she reviewed the proposal. The plan included regular bias training sessions, mentorship programs for young lawyers, and a technological framework for tracking and addressing disparities in judicial treatment. "You want to use our AI to monitor court proceedings for bias indicators?" she asked, turning to page 3 of his proposal. "With appropriate privacy protections, yes," Harrison nodded. "Your company already handles our security. Why not help us secure justice itself?" For the next hour, they discussed possibilities. Sarah shared insights from her tech perspective, while Harrison offered his understanding of judicial systems. Their conversation moved from confrontation to collaboration, two experts in different fields finding common ground. The same AI that detects security threats could be modified to identify patterns in judicial behavior, Sarah explained, sketching on her tablet. "We could create a dashboard showing judges their own patterns in sentencing, interruptions, and tone across different demographics." Harrison watched as she quickly coded a prototype interface. "This isn't about shaming anyone," he added. "It's about giving judges the tools to see their own blind spots." Sarah pulled up statistics from other courthouses using Secure Flow systems. "We could implement this as a pilot program in your courthouse first," she suggested, "then expand based on the results." As they talked, other team members joined the discussion. A diverse group of engineers and legal experts gathered around Sarah's desk, each adding their perspective to the growing project. "One condition," Sarah said finally. "This has to be more than a PR move. I want real commitment to change." Harrison agreed immediately. "I'll be the first to volunteer for the pilot program. Every decision, every interaction, I want it all monitored and analyzed. No exceptions." Sarah stood and extended her hand. "Then let's do this right. We'll need to bring in diversity consultants, legal ethics experts, and civil rights attorneys. This could become a model for judicial systems nationwide." As Harrison prepared to leave, he noticed a group of teenagers entering the building's tech lab, the same coding class Sarah taught regularly. She saw his glance and smiled. "Would you like to address them?" she asked. "They should know that even judges can learn and grow." Harrison nodded, humbled by the opportunity. Together, they walked toward the lab, their previous courtroom confrontation transformed into an unexpected partnership for change. Before they entered the classroom, Sarah turned to him. "You know, Judge Harrison, sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our most important work." He watched as she greeted each student by name, still wearing the casual clothes that had once led him to misjudge her so completely. In that moment, he realized that true justice wasn't just about following laws. It was about seeing people for who they really were, and having the courage to change when we fall short. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the National Judicial Conference buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of judges, attorneys, and legal professionals filled the room, their attention focused on the stage where Judge Harrison stood at the podium, preparing to introduce the keynote speaker. The large screens behind him displayed the conference theme, Innovation and Equity in Justice. Below it ran the familiar Secure Flow Technologies logo, now known nationwide for more than just security systems. A year ago, Harrison began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, I made a mistake that changed not just my perspective, but potentially the future of our judicial system. I let bias cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I almost missed an opportunity for revolutionary change. The audience sat in rapt attention as he continued. Our keynote speaker today wasn't just another defendant in my courtroom that morning. She was, and is, Sarah Bennett, CEO of Secure Flow Technologies. But more importantly, she became the catalyst for a transformation in how we address bias in our courts. Sarah walked onto the stage, dressed professionally, but carrying the same quiet confidence she'd shown in his courtroom a year ago. The audience applauded as she took her place at the podium, the screens behind her showing real-time data from their pilot program. The Judicial Fairness Initiative, Sarah began, started with a traffic ticket and an incorrect assumption, but it grew into something much more powerful. She clicked to the first slide, showing statistics from Judge Harrison's courthouse. The numbers told a compelling story. After implementing Secure Flow's new bias detection AI system, disparities in judicial treatment had decreased by 47%. The program had spread to 50 other courthouses across the country, with more joining every month. Technology alone can't solve bias, Sarah continued, but it can help us see patterns we might otherwise miss. She demonstrated the new judicial dashboard, showing how AI analyzed everything from tone of voice to interruption patterns, helping judges recognize their own unconscious biases. In the audience, Judge Martinez smiled, remembering her late-night conversation with Harrison in his chambers a year ago. Beside her sat Mrs. Rodriguez, the court clerk whose supple disapproval had been one of the first signs that something needed to change. Sarah shared stories from other courthouses using the system. Young lawyers reported feeling more heard, defendants from all backgrounds described fairer treatment, and judges spoke of their own journeys toward greater self-awareness. But the real hero of this story, Sarah said, turning to Judge Harrison, is not the technology. It's the willingness to acknowledge our mistakes and work to correct them. Harrison stood again, joining her at the podium. Together, they announced the next phase of the initiative, a nationwide rollout to every courthouse willing to participate, funded jointly by Secure Flow and a coalition of legal organizations committed to reform. The presentation ended with a video, clips from Sarah's coding classes, now held in courthouses across the city. Young students, especially girls and minorities, learned technology skills in the same rooms where justice was administered. The program had created a pipeline for diverse talent into both tech and legal fields. After the standing ovation, as the audience filed out for the lunch break, a young black law student approached Harrison. "Sir," she said, "I'll be clerking in your court next summer." Harrison smiled, remembering how differently he might have viewed her a year ago. "We'll be lucky to have you," he replied, meaning every word. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Sarah and Harrison stood near a window overlooking the city. Below them, traffic moved smoothly under smart cameras that now did more than just monitor violations. They helped ensure the systems enforcing those violations were fair. "Did you ever imagine," Harrison asked, "that a traffic ticket would lead to all this?" Sarah watched as a group of young legal professionals gathered around their bias detection demo station, eager to bring the technology to their own courthouses. "Sometimes," she replied, "the biggest changes start with the smallest moments." A year had passed, but the lesson remained clear. True justice required more than just laws and technology. It required people willing to look past their first impressions, to acknowledge their mistakes, and to work together for real change. As the evening wound down, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. Another courthouse had signed up for the program. Harrison glanced at the notification and smiled. Tomorrow, they would continue their work, one courtroom at a time, proving that while justice might be blind, those who served it needed to see clearly, not just with their eyes, but with their hearts and minds as well.